Okay, welcome everybody. It's noon. We want to get started, so we thank you all for coming. It's a great crowd. So I think it's probably due to the fact you're as confused as I am about these state questions. So we're lucky to have an expert with us, Pat McFerrin, and Pat's going to give us an overview of the questions and answer questions if you have any on your mind. So Pat, if you'd give us some bio and.
Well, thanks for having me up here to visit with everybody, and I hope this is interactive. I'll try to answer questions that you might have as we go through this. I do want to let you know a little bit about myself. I've been doing polling in Oklahoma since 1993 with a firm called Cole, Hargrave, Snodgrass & Associates. It was founded by Tom Cole and some others back in the late 80s. After Tom got elected to Congress, he's really not involved in any day-to-day relationship there, and so I'm running that organization. I am involved in a number of these state questions, and I do tend to work for Republican candidates. And so I want to let you know up front the bias there, and if you hear any bias coming from me, that's who I am. Call me on it, and I'll try to recognize that. I try to be very. My son is 17 years old, and he is a leader in the socialist youth group at his high school, so we have lots of fun conversations at home. So he's made me very aware of any biases I have on a regular basis, so I'll try to make sure that I try to convey those here. I will tell you, I want to go through all the state questions, but before I do that, I just want to tell you about the Oklahoma election environment and what we're seeing here overall as a state right now. I don't think anybody's surprised. We will be a state that will go decisively for Donald Trump in the presidential race. I know a lot of people talk about, that Obama never carried a county in Oklahoma in any of his two elections. I like to point out that John Kerry didn't either. We've been pretty solidly Republican on the presidential level. In fact, the last time we voted for a Democrat on the presidential level was 1964. And so that's going to continue. We are seeing some real transformations underneath those numbers. If you look historically in Oklahoma, the Republican base has been the two great metro areas, and then the rural Northwest has been the area that's been the most Republican, with the Southwest and the eastern part of the state being much more Democrat. And it's been those kind of three regions versus the other three, and they've been balanced, and that's changing. In our presidential election, if you take the western part of the state, take out the central Oklahoma area, Trump is up 50 points, 65 to 15. I actually believe that probably in the panhandle areas, there might be some counties that have more people vote for Gary Johnson than vote for Hillary Clinton. That is how distinct that is. The eastern half of the state, Little Dixie, the area that formerly been primarily the Democrat area, Trump is up by about 33 points. In Metro Tulsa, he's up by 9, and Metro Oklahoma City is up by 8. Oklahoma is quickly becoming like much of the rest of the nation, where our urban areas are going to be Democrat, progressive kind of areas, and our rural areas are becoming more and more Republican. That's good. The implication for that long term is when you get to the state legislative, right, you're going to continue to see a majority of the controlling party be represented by more rural interests and not the cities. So for communities like Ponca, Enid, Duncan, Bartlesville, these types of places, I think that's actually going to be something that's going to help in a representation for this part of the state over time, because you're going to make sure that your legislative leaders are in the majority. And it's going to be a flip of what it was in the state legislature 20, 25 years ago. So anyway, that's kind of the environment where things are going. There is a disconnect with Republicans right now. If there's an angry group, it tends to be upper income Republicans right now that are disappointed, quite frankly, that I think they think the Republican Party is spending too much time talking about abortion and tax cuts. And that's especially what's happening in the urban areas where those are changing. So anyway, that's kind of the environment where everything is in this election cycle. But we'll go through the state questions just kind of one by one. And I do a little bit of a focus group here because I want to know, you guys obviously are here so you have some interest in it. But if I talk about state question 776, how many people know what that state question is? Okay, so roughly about a third. That is the death penalty state question. How many people knew we were voting on a death penalty state question? Okay, so it's just the numbers not getting there. there does not seem to be significant organized proponents or opposition on this state question, at least not spending any financial resources in doing so. This state question is one that would allow Oklahoma to use alternative methods for carrying out the death penalty. Its passage or failure has nothing to do with if the death penalty is legal or not in Oklahoma. It just says that they could use any means that's not considered inhumane by the federal government. Right now, Oklahoma, by statute, is limited, I think, to only 3 different ways of carrying out the death penalty. I might be off on one of, there might be something else, but I think it's firing squad, electric chair, or the drug cocktail, the specific drug cocktail. And so this would allow Oklahoma, as technology changes and things, to move forward. I have heard, contrary to what some people have said, this is not about the budget. I've had some people tell me they thought this was about the budget, that Oklahoma could no longer afford the electric chair, and so they had to use the acoustic, and that was why they were having to do this state question. But that is not true. So, how many people know what state question 777 is? Yep. That is one of the ones that is the most talked about in the state. That is the right to farm or right to harm, depending on which side you're on. And I should point out, I'm not involved in 776, the death penalty one. I'm not involved in the right to farm issue either. What's interesting there, I will tell you, I'm actually pretty conflicted. I grew up in Nowata, Oklahoma. My family had a meat packing plant. I grew up really involved in ag. And then I do a lot of work with Oklahoma City, some others in the municipal league. Other groups tend to help out on a lot of municipal bond issues. Just passed a penny sales tax in Enid for them to build a pipeline to Kaw Lake. I'm involved in that a lot. And so, but a lot of the municipalities tend to have real concerns about this state question. And you guys, that you're aware of, you guys probably know more about some of the arguments on this than I do on the other side. I think the real challenge here is figuring out what's a real argument and what's a red herring, and I'm not going to make that distinction for you. But there are a number of different questions here on this. One, I think the first question is, how real is the threat of animal rights extremists implementing their wishes on Oklahomans? I think that's where one of the real questions is. If you really believe that that's a real legitimate threat, then you're probably going to be voting yes, because I think everybody involved in this campaign, I think everybody agrees that Oklahomans want agriculture to thrive. The question is, does this help that or not? So the other question is, how is giving special privileges to the agricultural industry in the state constitution, what long-term effect does that really have? It doesn't necessarily address specific issues, but for example, I've heard that there are claims being made that since they will have a constitutional protection, if you have a farmer that wants to irrigate his corn crop, and you've got a city that needs water to supply its people, the argument is that the agricultural use will get first dibs. And so you might not have drinking water if we had a severe drought or had an issue. Or if you needed to pick between irrigating a crop or being able to produce oil and gas. Maybe because they have this new constitutional protection and right, that agriculture would have the first choice on that water. I'm not a lawyer. That's one of the few sins I'm not going to have to account for. So I don't know if I could tell you that those are accurate statements or not. But those are the arguments that are being made with different levels of effect. We do see, as we look at the polling on that, it seems to be moving very dramatically. 3 weeks ago, I had close to 70% support for State Question 777. I have not been back in the field myself since then, but there is public polling out showing that it is now almost a dead even race. I think that's one where it has the most fluidity. And it doesn't surprise me. When I looked at my polling I did 3 weeks ago, at that time, we had 38% of the people, when we asked them, other than president and local elected officials, what state questions will you vote on? without giving them a list, 38% knew that they were going to vote on right to farm or 777. Among that group that was aware of it, it was failing 41 to 46. As a pollster, that's an indication that as more information becomes available on a state question, it'll end up going that direction. So I knew it was going to close and become a very competitive contest once more people knew more about it. I do think that the urban areas have become very activated, seeing a lot of information about this state question. It has some lines along partisan lines. Democrats are more likely to be opposed to it than Republicans, but it's not dramatic as one might expect. And we see older voters being more supportive of it than younger voters. This is a state question that I think would have easily passed had it been put on a gubernatorial election year ballot. During a gubernatorial election year, senior citizens will make up 40 to 45% of the voters. In this presidential year, those over 65 will only be 27 to 28% of the voters. Those senior citizens vote every election, and so we're going to have such a tremendous uptick in people under 65 voting, particularly those under 45, that will diminish that senior citizen vote as we move forward. And because of the lines here, I think this is one that would have been more successful. And I'm not saying it's not going to be successful, but it would have been easily successful, I think, if it had been placed on a different ballot with a lower turnout. But the new people coming to vote that just come to vote for president seem to be looking like they're going to vote no on that state question. So with that, I probably should have told you, I expect the death penalty one to pass overwhelmingly. I see very little opposition to it, and so I expect it to be there. So before we go on to the others, any questions about right to farm? Yes?
My understanding that 777 gives the agricultural community a protected class. Basically, they're a protected class. Nobody's entitled to a protected class.
No, that's the argument. They would be the only industry that would have a constitutional protection. I heard some people talk about, okay, I'm a community banker. I want that protection now too, that nobody can make rules governing what I do. My guess is there are manufacturers and others that would like to have that too. The question becomes, are you someone that sees that as unfair, or, hey, good for you. If you can get it, go get it. So I don't know that Oklahoma voters have fully decided where they are on that issue, but I don't think there's any doubt this will create a protected class for the agriculture. And that's, you could argue that, we've been a state that's supported that in the past to an extent, not the constitutional protection, but we have, sales tax exemptions for agricultural use. We have different, car tags for farm vehicles and things like that. And I think a lot of people see a value in that. And to me, that's the risk I think the proponents have on this, is if this fails, I think you might see some people wanting to come out and say, oh, look, the agricultural industry doesn't have the sway with voters we thought it did. We'll go after some of these other, areas where they've had special treatment, for lack of a better term. And I hate to use that because I'm not trying. I don't want to put my own any value judgment on what that is. But they are treated differently. Yes.
Now, along these same lines, how is this going to affect the corporate farms, which are run different than the family farms and the family-owned farms?
I think that's one of the big questions, and I know the opponents of this are making that argument that this is really just for the corporate farms. And I'll speak at it from a polling perspective. This same state question was passed in Missouri just a couple of years ago, something very, very similar. There was a few wording differences. The opponents of it were not very well funded there. They spent $40,000 on a television ad talking about Chinese farms and Chinese corporate farms, and it changed that polling within a week's time to where it barely passed. And so we're seeing that on television now, where you see the Chinese corporate farms message there, and it does look from the polling that it is resonating. And I think there are enough spokespeople with the small family farm hat on that I think that we're seeing division. This hasn't turned into the urban-rural fight I think the proponents thought it would be. I think there's dissension in rural Oklahoma as well along those lines because of what you're talking about. That's what the polling shows. Yes? It says that's in Oklahoma or in the nation? Yeah, that would be information to me. That's not my understanding. I can tell you from my polling perspective, one of the questions we ask all the time is, do you think things are headed in the right direction or have they gotten off on the wrong track? And that generally tracks with two things in Oklahoma. And some people argue a third, but it generally tracks with the price of oil and whatever wheat's bringing in. The third one actually is wins at the University of Oklahoma for their football team, but the other two are much more stable. So, okay, we might have time to come back to Right to Farm if we want to do that later. Anybody know what how many people are confident if I call on you, you can tell me what 780 and 781 do? Okay, that's actually pretty good. This is what I think people would argue is really the fourth most, and I know I skipped one. I'll come back to it later. The number 4 on the list, the number 4 and 5 on the list of 7 state questions as far as their awareness level. They're well behind the 3 big ones, which take a little step aside here a little bit. Anybody want to take a guess on what the most expensive state question in our state's history has been up to this date? No, it was 16 years ago, or 15 years ago, I guess. Right to work. Right to work's been about $6 million. There's a chance that both Right to Farm and 779 could surpass that this year. But there's no doubt that the other 3 ones this year will be, all 3 of those will make the top 4 most expensive state questions in our state's history. The 779, alcohol modernization, and Right to Farm. Those will all be there. In any other election cycle, what's being spent on 780 and 781 would seem like it's a really dominant number. This is the criminal justice reform measures. Really, 780 has 2 key components. And I am engaged. I'm doing polling on this. I'm not running the campaign or anything, but I am monitoring this and involved in 780 and 781. The 780 does 2 things. It makes possession of drugs a misdemeanor instead of a felony, and it changes the threshold for a property crime from a misdemeanor, from a felony to a misdemeanor for things stolen between $500 and $1,000 in value. The proponents of this I think they got quite a few different cases here, and I'll make some of those here. One, the $500 threshold is low. It hasn't been increased for a number of years. And what they're finding is if you've got a 17 or 18-year-old kid in high school that gets in a fight with his buddy, I mean, this is, again, their argument, takes his PlayStation and 4 video games, all of a sudden he's a felon, you know. And so they think that threshold needs to be raised. They point to the fact that 1 in 12 adult Oklahomans have a felony conviction now because that felony label is given out very quickly in Oklahoma. We have one of the lowest property value property rates for that felony conviction in the state. They also argue that drug addiction is a disease, not a crime, and that what we're doing right now is not solve that. That actually what we're doing is putting someone that has a disease in jail where they're around criminals and they come out, they still have the same disease, they still have the same addiction, and it gets worse and worse and worse, and that leads to greater and greater and greater property crime and violence issues. The analogy they use a lot, that I don't know if they're using it on television, but they are using it face-to-face, is say, you know, if you believe that addiction is a disease, just like diabetes is, we treat those totally different. If someone, even though they know they're not supposed to have sugar and they have a diabetic episode, it doesn't matter how many times they've had that episode, we get them to the doctor, the state pays for most of their treatment, and they go on and are told, you know, stay to your regimen, do what you're supposed to do. If someone has the disease of addiction, they fall prey to that, and again, this is from the proponent side. They then, we put them in jail, It's a place where they don't get treatment for it, and they get back out, and they have problems again. So the argument they would use, if you're someone that is opposed to taxes on sugar or criminalizing, consumption of soda pop, then you need to be for State Question 780 and 781, or you're being hypocritical. I'm not sure. Again, I'm giving you the arguments that they provide at times. The opponents are not spending many resources against it. There are, and I will tell you, the law enforcement community, I won't say it's evenly divided, but it is divided. There are some sheriffs, chiefs of police, at least former district attorneys that are very supportive of this measure. I've heard sheriffs say that they're tired they believe their jails have become hospitals where they're providing medical care as opposed to keeping bad people locked up. But most of the law enforcement community is against this. They think it is soft on crime. They point to one issue that concerns them more than others, and that is that the way it is written right now, this law would mean if you were convicted of having heroin and cocaine 500 times, you'd still be charged with a misdemeanor each time. And they say that's not good for public safety. The counter the proponents make is that if you're addicted to heroin and cocaine, you're not going to be convicted 500 times. You're going to be dead by that point. Or you're going to escalate and you'll be caught on the burglary, property crimes, other issues. Or you escalate and you get into drug trafficking or distribution, and those things don't change. Once you go beyond personal use or anything, those would still be felonies. And so that's their argument there. The interesting aspect of this one, in contrast to the others, is this state question is only statutory. That means that the legislature can change this. Unlike 777, the right to farm, which prohibits the legislature from changing, it's a constitutional change. This would be statutory. And so the legislature could go in and make a tweak there, and I think there have been some conversations along that lines of, let's make it 5 times, let's get you treatment, and then if you fail to do treatment, you can move on. This state question is really dependent. It's one that benefits from the larger turnout. Younger voters tend to be more supportive. Right now, it's in the high 50s support. There was a public poll out that showed it in the low 70s. I'll tell you, I don't track with that one at all. It does seem to be popular, because the one thing Oklahomans agree on is our current criminal justice system does not work. 83% say our prisons are overcrowded and that's a problem. 87% say we spend too much on corrections. 85% say it's wrong that we incarcerate more women than any other state in the nation. We're second most in overall incarceration rate, and we have more than 80% that say that having 1 in 12 adults with a felony conviction is wrong. So there's a broad-based recognition in Oklahoma that there are things that are wrong. The question is this something that fixes it? And right now, voters are leaning toward that. 781 is a companion state question. It only goes into effect if 780 is also passed. And what this does is it sets up a structure to calculate the cost savings from having fewer people incarcerated, and has that money given to counties and local entities to provide primarily, the hope is drug addiction treatment. And for monitoring on a local level how we deal with what is really, I think most people in here would agree that we have a serious drug problem in Oklahoma, and how do we deal with that? Right now, the primary way we deal with it is incarceration. So with that, and I know I'd be interested to know what you're hearing, other arguments for and against, and I'll be happy to, I can argue both sides on this, because like I said, I'm working actually monitoring this and doing some things for the pro side. The District Attorney's Council is also a client of mine, so I'm on both sides of this issue squarely. So, yes.
Part of 780 that also changes some of the safety rules on conviction, like
Yes, but it just deals with the possession issue, and that is one of the concerns. I think that my understanding is actually that the law enforcement professionals, as a general rule, do not mind that change, but they see it as an opportunity to get emotional buy-in on this. So it does make possession near a school ground a misdemeanor as well instead of a felony. But if you candidly talk to some people, they will say that there are DAs that don't bring charges. You've got an 18-year-old that's still in high school and has marijuana in his locker. If you go by a strict order of the law right now, that person will be saddled with a felony conviction. And this takes that away. And so it might actually lead to more enforcement on school grounds is the argument. But it is something I think people are very concerned about.
Pat, you know that the legislature starting November 1 passed a law that said that the DAs can charge misdemeanors in drug cases and other cases if they feel it merits it. So that would take that one argument away, would it not?
Yes, yes. But the trouble is, yeah, you're absolutely right. And so I think that does. And again, I think there are people that can articulate things there. But I do think that is a big concern there. I have talked to some that I think they would say, look, I don't want to be, I could do that, but I don't want to. There's actually some more former DAs, I guess, I've talked to that said, look, I don't want to be painted that I'm a DA that's soft on crime. So if I have a choice, I'm generally going to go with the other. But I think you make a very valid point.
Is it also true that a repeat misdemeanor offender would rehab for drug court would be voluntary versus a requirement?
Someone might be able to explain more of that than me. That's,
No one's going to go into drug court on a misdemeanor. They're going to say that it's not worth the pain and the time and the mistake. It'll basically cut the drug court in half.
no, that's the other argument I should probably make here is that right now, to get someone to get treatment, we have a hammer, and we're taking that hammer away if you vote yes.
Just real quick, so you just correct. If it does pass, there's still room for the legislature to change things. Certain things that are not working correctly, like say the school zone.
Yeah, and that's a two-edged sword, and I think that's why neither campaign's talking about that very much. You know, if you don't have to show your, how many people have trust in the state legislature to do the right thing? So that's one of the challenges, is that people want to say, oh, we can fix this later, but we're going to rely on people that, quite frankly, has an 18% approval rating in the state right now, that people don't trust to do the right thing. And so that's why you're not seeing anybody talk about that on either side. One, the opponents don't want to say it can be fixed, and the proponents don't want to say it's going to be fixed by the legislature. So, because you take away the severity of voting yes if you say it can be fixed on one side, and then, again, I don't think people want to put trust in the legislature. Anything else? You know, other things on that?
So that California passed this several years ago, and the crime rate went up 21%.
Well, and if you'd been on the other side, I would have made that same statement here. The other side is Texas has passed this and found billions of dollars in savings they've been able to put in schools. So now I will tell you that both sides would say that both California and Texas are not real analogous, but they're the closest we've got. But those are the real challenges. Yes.
But the way the next question is written, those savings would not go to schools in Oklahoma. They already said where those savings would go, correct?
I think there's a significant number of savings that go to that, but I think that the proponents would argue that the savings long-term will greatly exceed that as the incarceration levels go down over time, and we'll have other cost savings beyond just that. But I think that's one of the...
Say that people who are in possession of crimes don't go to prison. It's people that violate other laws that have violated that go to prison.
Right. No, and if you go and look at the data, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there are you can find in the state system, and part of the trouble is I think it's difficult to get good data from the State Department of Corrections and different things. But I think 7 people in jail for a first-time drug offense in the state. I mean, you make an argument that really just doesn't happen. Or in prison, I should say. Okay. All right. I think we've spent a lot of time on that. We'll go to the other one that's not. I'm going to make you guys flip paper as much as I can. State Question 790. Okay. How many people are familiar with it? Okay. I don't know what you have in front of you. If you haven't read anything else, I want you to take time. Do you have the actual ballot title there? Let me read just the ballot title to you, and then I want to show of hands. Try not to read anything else here. This measure would remove Article 2, Section 5 of the Oklahoma Constitution, which prohibits the government from using public money or property for the direct or indirect benefit of any religion or religious institution. Article 2, Section 5 has been interpreted by the Oklahoma court as requiring the removal of a Ten Commandments monument from the grounds of the state capitol. If this measure repealing Article 2, Section 5 is passed, the government would still be required to comply with the Establishment Clause of the United States Constitution, which is a similar constitutional provision that prevents the government from endorsing a religion or becoming overly involved with religion. Okay, from that, how many people think voting yes will let the Ten Commandments be displayed? How many people think voting no will let the Ten Commandments be displayed? All right, this question is one that drives pollsters and everybody crazy. All right? If I ask Oklahomans, do you think the Ten Commandments should be displayed on government grounds? 78% say yes. Okay? Oklahomans believe that should be the case. This state question, voting yes will allow the Ten Commandments to be displayed. Only 40% are supporting this from reading the ballot question. And the group most likely to be opposed are those that attend church or consider themselves to be evangelical or born-again Christians. This question is so poorly worded, no offense to my friend the Attorney General who wrote it, but it is really a very, very confusing state question. And I will argue that it is, and you'll see there's a lot of national people coming in asking people to vote no on this, that this state question has much further reaching consequences than maybe any of the others on the ballot that we have. It is the Article 5, Section 2, or whatever the numbers are that mean nothing to anybody, is known as the Blaine Amendment. Back in the late 1800s, as part of becoming a state, the federal government passed a law that every new state coming into the country had to have the, quote, Blaine Amendment, named after Senator Blaine. This was a KKK-promoted anti-Catholic amendment to keep any states from funding Catholic schools, is really what it was about. And so they all had to have this language in there to keep any Catholic structures from getting any state funding. It has been used systematically in other states by some atheist and agnostic organizations, Freedom from Religion being the top one. You might have saw the article in the Oklahoman, to stop the use of any religious in government. The trouble is that, right or wrong, our government is pretty intertwined with religion in Oklahoma. The number one medical payer in the state is Medicaid. They spend a lot of that at St. Anthony's Hospital, St. John's Hospital, St. Francis, Mercy, the former Baptist Hospital. A lot of our hospitals and healthcare providers are religiously based. Taken to the extreme, this would mean that nobody on Sooner Care or Medicaid could use any of these hospital providers. That challenge, I have no doubt that if this state question fails, that lawsuit will be filed. If it's successful or not, I don't know. They've had very different degrees of success across the country with that. If you have Boy Scouts or Boys and Girls Club or Whiz Kids or something like that, a tutoring group that uses a school, that does after-school care, that probably goes by the wayside if this question doesn't pass, or at least a lawsuit challenging that will take place. Because most of those groups have some religious affiliation at some point, some acknowledgement of a higher being, and that would mean that those groups could be subject to lawsuits to get them out of different facilities. Now, the other side will argue that voting yes on this would open the state up for a voucher program, for school vouchers. I know a lot of people that say yes, that's great. Other people that say that's a concern and a great concern for public education. But they will be using that as an argument as well. But to be real clear, the key thing I want you to take away from, regardless of which side you're on, voting yes is for allowing limited government religious partnerships that still have to abide by the U.S. Constitution, such as churches engaging in the foster care program, those kind of things and everything else. Voting no would be against allowing the display of the Ten Commandments and would be for a reinforcement of this obscure part of the state constitution that only recently has become the subject of the debate and discussion. The lawyers will tell you that arguments on both sides are overblown. We do have a limited voucher program called the Lindsay Nicole Henry Scholarship Program in Oklahoma that can only be used by special needs families. And there are some parochial schools that accept that. The state Supreme Court ruled that even with this amendment still in the Constitution, this Blaine Amendment, that those were still legal, as long as it wasn't primarily for a parochial school, since there were some schools that were not parochial that were accepting it as well. So that is one question that I think, because it's interesting. I mean, everybody knows that money is the lifeblood of politics. There's not as much money to be made on that state question, so there aren't a lot of people interested in it. I think the hospitals and others are not funding the yes vote on it because they've won these court cases in other places. I don't know that they see that as being a huge, big concern. And quite frankly, with the changes in Obamacare and the ACA and the state not taking federal Medicaid dollars for them, they're having trouble staying afloat anyway and don't have extra money to spend on it. So that's why you're not hearing as much about this one. There's not as much interest because there's not profit motive on the yes or no side like there is on most of these other state questions. Yes?
After all the explanations, would you or the DA vote yes or no on that question? And you can decline an answer.
On the Ten Commandments one? I'll vote yes.
I don't think it's going to, Ten Commandments are going to go back either way. The Supreme Court's not going to allow it. The U.S. Supreme Court's not going to allow it back on. So I think it's a waste of time.
Yep. To me, to me, instead of about the Ten Commandments, this is about, do we risk the prison ministries, the relationships we have there, foster care programs, these other things that I do think the national people will come after. And we have to realize there that on the national side, Oklahoma is a place where liberals can place their marker. And if you're someone that's successful in Oklahoma and come and say, I won this here, I did this here, you can raise a lot of money nationally as a political consultant by saying, I went to the reddest of the red states and I got something liberal done. And so pay me to do it in these other states. And we've seen that happen on both sides. And so I think that's actually what's happening here. I think the no side there is pretty much a national movement. Okay. So we got two others. I'm going to save education for last. The last one is alcohol modernization. I am very involved in that. And I will tell you that it continues to improve as far as its support. Oklahoma is one of only 5 states that has what is known as 3-2 beer. And we are more than 50, I think it's 56% of all 3-2 beer sold in the nation is sold in Oklahoma. Part of that's because to our north here in Kansas, they have 3-2 beer in grocery and convenience stores, but regular strength beer in liquor stores, and liquor stores can sell it cold. What makes it different in Oklahoma is we are the only state where you don't have full strength versions of the large domestic producers of Anheuser-Busch, Coors, and Miller. And that has to do with our franchising laws. It would be legal for those organizations to sell their full-strength product in Oklahoma's liquor stores, but they've chosen not to historically because we have some we have unique franchise laws. We're the only state in the nation that doesn't allow franchising, and that's one of the other key components of this state questions, that will allow franchising for liquor. We have franchising for 3-2. We do not have franchising for anything above 3-2 in the state right now. This would not mandate that franchising, but it would allow it. I guess so. We're the only state in the nation that doesn't allow franchising, where the government doesn't fully control all the alcohol system, as Pennsylvania, Virginia, a few places do. The key components of this, from a consumer standpoint, is this would allow regular strength beer up to 8.99% alcohol content, and wine, I think, up to 15% in grocery and convenience stores. It would also allow liquor stores to sell refrigerated products, something they're unable to do now, and would also allow them to sell non-alcohol products. Up to 20% of their sales could be ice mixers. It could be tires or washers and dryers or something if they wanted to. It could be anything they want it to be. Those are the key consumer changes. It would also, while not fully open, it would allow direct shipment of wine in Oklahoma, we're one of 4 states that don't allow that now, and it would allow that to happen, but it's pretty limited. The only wine you could have shipped to your house would be that was not already readily available somewhere in the state through a franchise agreement with somebody, and it would only be wine that was produced in smaller quantities across the country. And you'd also have to have someone over 21 sign for it, and there would actually be a registration process where you'd have to register with the state that you were someone that was having wine shipped. So there are a lot of restrictions on there. One of the key components that's happening is right now, almost all of our alcohol laws are governed by our Constitution. This would restrict what's governed by the Constitution and put a large amount of that in statutory language. There are some other issues here, for example, that will be in the statutory side. Right now, a 16-year-old can be a clerk that sells 3-2 beer in a convenience store. That would no longer be the case. That would raise to 18. And so again, like I said, I'm on the yes side, so I see that as raising the clerk age from 16 to 18. The opponents would say, right now, you have to be 21 to sell wine, so you're lowering the wine age from 21 to 18. But to me, that's a little bit of a fallacious argument. I mean, we technically consider 3-2 beer a non-intoxicating food product in Oklahoma, and that generally gets giggles when you say that 3-2 beer is non-intoxicating. So this is an opportunity to be honest about what beer is. The opponents, their primary argument is that it will hurt local liquor stores, and they point to Texas and Arkansas, where they have fewer liquor stores per person than we have in Oklahoma. And so they estimate that a quarter of liquor stores will go out of business. They'll also, if you talk to them further, they'll say, but the ones that stay will be more successful because there'll be fewer places buying spirits. Spirits will still be the exclusive venue of liquor stores. There will not be, it won't be like Missouri or some other places you might have been. Spirits will not be available in grocery stores or convenience stores. Spirits will still only be in liquor stores. Trying to think, the franchise thing is another argument that they are making. But if you take product prices for specific brands, you will see that Oklahoma is already higher than it is in states that have the franchise agreement on more than 90% of the top 1,500 SKUs they have. Yes?
If this passes, though, it also reduces the charge for selling to minors, correct?
It does. It does change that. But my understanding is I think there are commitments from the legislature to raise that dollar amount fine. And it does, the other thing it does is right now enforcement on 3-2 is primarily relegated to the Oklahoma Tax Commission. There will be some more revenues here, and it'll beef up, the goal is to beef up, I think the promise is to beef up Able Commission and have more oversight there. But yes. Excuse me? That's not the way I read the language, and that's not my understanding. So I don't think that's anywhere written in statute.
We're trying to get DUI. It seems odd to me that we put 5,000 more places in the state of Oklahoma selling the product. Quickers look for 2 more than Walmart does 24 hours a day. I think that's on the road.
Well, no, I understand, and I will tell you, and I think that's one of the concerns opponents are raising there. Just to clear up a few things, this will actually, the way it's written right now, this will actually reduce the number of hours that beer is available. Right now, 3-2 beer is available, I think, from 6 a.m. till 2. This will be from 7 a.m. to 2. Not a big change, and probably a Scribner's error, but it won't be available 24 hours. But it will be regular strength beer instead of 3-2. The proponent. Yeah, I will tell you, Walmart's a client I work for. They do not want it 24 hours a day. They would have been fine if it went back to midnight. They think it's better for their stores. They prefer. In fact, there were places where they had that option. They choose not to. The point that some would make is that if you look at the different states, accessibility does not seem to correlate with DUIs. South Carolina has much more liberal laws on where alcohol is available, and they have a much lower DUI rate than Oklahoma does. Now, you can look at the other side and see Missouri, which has more DUIs than Oklahoma does, and they also have more liberal laws where they have the spirits everywhere as well. So there's lots of different information there, but that's obviously a very, very valid concern. They would also argue that, being honest about what 3.2 beer is and not pretending it's not intoxicating is a big component of that.
But some of those other states who did get this law passed, they recognized by passing this law and the accessibility piece of it would be greater, that they knew there would be a greater problem with alcoholism. They created prevention funds to help offset this accessibility piece. So can you give any light to why Oklahoma did not add that piece in to help prevention?
Well, one, I do believe that there will be new tax revenue from this because regular strength beer is taxed at a higher rate than 3.2. 85% of the beer sold in Oklahoma is 3.2 beer. There will be new revenue. I've heard commitments from legislators to make sure this gets to mental health funding. The reality is it was the legislative process. The mental health community was offered a couple of ways to increase funding and do things, and they rejected it because they didn't want to, because they wanted to be totally against the bill. So part of it was a legislative decision. And I will tell you, that's the same thing with some of the liquor stores that were opposed. They were offered full corporate ownership, unlimited number of stores if they wanted it, and they argued against it, even though they're using those arguments now to be against it. So that happens in legislative things all the time. I'm happy to answer more questions on this. I know we've got some other time, but what I do want to say is that this is one that benefits from. Polling is my real expertise. And this is one that benefits from being on the presidential year, and that's why it's designed to be there. Those under 55 are supporting this by an 80% clip. Those over 65 are now mildly supportive. And the big argument there is that there is we'll point out that the other side, and you've seen, I'm sure you've seen that the TV ads. Prior to Prohibition, Oklahoma had more than 5,000 acres in grape production. We were, by some counts, the fourth largest grape and wine producer in the nation. We're now down to 500 acres, and there's a belief that this will really help the grape industry in Oklahoma and help diversify agriculture, as well as we're 46th in the nation in craft beers right now, which is one of the fastest growing industries in the nation. So those are two other arguments. People make economic arguments for it as kind of the counter to the liquor store side. So since I did that, I'll give one more question out here, to be fair. Do you have another one? Okay. All right. 779. Is what's known as the Boren tax or the education tax. This is a penny sales tax to go to education. There is no doubt, our polling shows that education is one of the top two concerns in the state, the economy being the other. If you ask people what's their most important issue, 30% will say education, 32% will say the economy right now. And if you ask people what they are concerned about on education, it is all about teacher funding. If we ask people, would you favor a tax increase for teacher pay, 67% support that. If we say, would you favor a 1 cent sales tax for teacher pay, it's 61%. And that's about where we have this state question right now, 61% support, 30% opposed. There's not been an organized no campaign to date. That is changing. You'll see TV commercials tonight or tomorrow on the no side. There was actually an announcement yesterday that an organization had been started. Mayor Bill Shuey of Enid's the chairman of that. The Municipal League, county commissioners, quite a few others are getting involved in the no campaign. I think you guys have all seen the yes campaign. It's about teachers, it's about school funding, about Oklahoma being 49th in teacher pay, about some very real issues we have with education funding. The no side will quickly tell Oklahomans that less than half of the money in this bill is actually for teacher pay. A $5,000 teacher pay raise would cost $245 million a year. This raises $615 million a year. They will tell you that a lot of this is going to higher ed. I'll tell you, higher ed funding is not popular in Oklahoma. They will not tell you that career tech gets a small percentage because career tech is very popular in Oklahoma. And that's why you're seeing the yes side talk about, 3.25%, I think is the percentage going to career tech. The no side won't talk about that. The no side won't talk about early childhood education, which I think is around 6% as well. The yes side probably talk about that. The yes side will not talk about 20% going to higher ed. Or about the money going to Common Ed that's not designated for teacher pay raise. Now, it's supposedly, they'll argue that and this is why I think you saw Toby Keith come out so strong saying it was a lockbox. But how they define that lockbox, I think, is open to consideration. I think you'll see a lot of talk about this over the next 2 weeks on both sides. A lot of look at the details. And there'll be lots of he said, she said going back and forth. I think this is one I still expect it to pass because there's no other plan out there. I will tell you, I think that most people will say the legislature really made a mistake by not coming up with an alternative. Even if it had been, here's a 0.4 sales tax just for teacher pay, people would have opted for that in a heartbeat. Voters would have opted for actually even extending the tax on services a small amount to pay for this. They would have been for getting rid of any number of tax credits to pay for this. It reminds me a little bit of the old Winston Churchill line, that democracy is the worst form of government except for everything else. For the voters, this is the worst possible plan for teacher pay raise, except there's not another one out there. And they so want that teacher pay raise, they look like they're being supportive. Now, there are some different things, and I don't know. Does anybody know, is Ponca City on the formula? And is it fully on the formula or partially on the formula for their school district? Most of northwestern Oklahoma, because they have high property valuations, are not on the formula. They will be extremely damaged by this. I think there are 89 school districts out of the 515 that will be damaged. They will get the mandate for teacher pay, but by some reads of this, they won't get a nickel to pay for it. And so it could lead to larger class sizes and other issues. Because the way they've designed this, it was a choice they had to make. The funding formula supposedly is apolitical. So they said, we don't want to be political and let the legislature say how this money goes, so we're going to use this funding formula. But the way the funding formula works, there's a number of districts that don't get the full funding from it. And so there will be some districts that do not get, they get the mandate to raise teacher pay $5,000, but again, won't get the money for that. The proponents will say, the funding formula is statutory, we can change that and fix that, or we can interpret it a different way and have these people get the money before it goes through they still get the $5,000 per teacher pay raise, but there are problems with that as well, because then it's not on a per pupil basis if it's just per teacher, how many teachers you have employed. If you're a district that's prioritized smaller class size over other districts, you'd end up getting more money than someplace else. So I think you'll start seeing lots of devils in the details on this kind of deal. But there's no doubt this is very popular as a concept. Taking a step back, anybody want to guess who the most popular political figure is in the state? It's Tom Coburn. Anybody want to know who the second most popular is? David Boren. And it's very, very close between the two of them. So I talked to you about some of the education side and some of their opposition here. I think municipalities have another big concern here. Our cities in Oklahoma City are more dependent on the sales tax than any other state in the nation. The trouble is the public doesn't care that much about it. It still matters some. They're getting concerned about police and fire funding. People do get concerned when they say this is going to hurt our ability to fund our police and fire. They do get concerned in Oklahoma City if you say we're not going to be able to have maps anymore, or vision in Tulsa, or funding for county jails, county road programs, other infrastructure needs. This is one that's going to, if this were on the gubernatorial election year, I think it would fail. But younger voters, those under 45, again, are an 85% supportive of this measure. And part of it is they don't care that it'll make Oklahoma the highest sales tax in the nation because they're shopping online more anyway. And they also have less tax sensitivity than others. So to me, one of the challenges is this could cause more people to shop online, which it's not just about passing another sales tax for a city, it's about hurting what we've already got committed and what we're already doing in cities that are relying on sales tax. It's also a regressive tax that hurts the poor more than others. And so there are lots of reasons to be opposed, but those all right now from polling pale in comparison to our teachers being underpaid. Yes?
If you could answer, what happened to the lottery in education? That was supposed to be the answer to this problem I haven't heard about.
I can't answer that, but I will tell you that people that we've solved the education problem. And my wife is a 26-year nationally board certified and master teacher, elementary school teacher. Just in my lifetime, liquor by the drink, pari-mutuel horse racing, casino gambling, House Bill 1017, and the lottery have all solved education issues at different places. But, every time that's happened, the legislature has stopped funding things at other levels, or lots of times things just are overpromised what they're going to be able to deliver.
With the $5,000 raise, where does that put us right now?
It depends on, there's lies, darn lies, and statistics, as you all know. So you can look at that a number of different ways. The proponents of this will say that even with this $5,000 raise, we're still $4,000 behind North Texas for a first-year teacher, if you pick out Denton. Part of the difference is in Texas, they pay a much smaller percentage of the health benefits. We have, even though it's underfunded and people have concerns about its stability, our pension program in Oklahoma is is still a defined benefit program, which most people have gone to. I'm blanking on the terminology here. Yeah, defined contribution, and so there's some comparisons there. And if you factor in cost of living, there are on the extreme. People say this $5,000 raise will put us in the top 15 in the country in teacher pay, if you adjust for cost of living and everything else. Others say it gets us to 46 or 45. So I do think it's a challenge. On the teacher pay, you could have, again, this is where it could be another plan. I think a lot of people think that maybe the veteran teacher should have got a $7,500 pay raise, and the new teacher's only $2,500, because our attrition is not in getting new people into the classroom, it's in getting long tenured teachers to stay. But this is a one-size-fits-all, 5,000.
Will this $5,000 raise force the districts to reconsider, or the state board to reconsider how they fund health insurance? Will they start to keep some of that raise?
I think that the way this is written, I don't think the legislature can take that action unless they do it out of future growth revenue. Once this sets a bar for what is spent on education overall, no matter what happens to the economy, you can never go below that. So they will still spend that level. So I think there is some protection against that happening. Yes.
Is there an intention to have a sunset on this, that at some point this, or just the answer?
No, this is a permit. This is in the Constitution. We'll take a vote of the people to repeal this. Yes.
The new law that has been put back regarding exempt versus non-exempt personnel, I think that is some threshold how does that affect teachers?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know. I can't answer that at all. Okay. I'm being told teachers are exempt. Yeah, you'll have to find somebody else afterwards. That's something I'm not familiar with that issue at all. Something was said earlier that sparked something else I wanted to say on that issue about the teacher pay, but I can't remember what it was. Any other questions about this or anything else? Yes.
How do we find out about how our district and the funding formula works for our local community?
I will tell you, my guess is local superintendent's probably the best place to find that kind of information. There is no one single clearinghouse. I know people that have spent time running 60, 70, 80 different school districts to see. And you have to realize when this $5,000 raise comes, it's going to change the ADM, and if it's a weighted ADM and all these other things. So just because you're not on the formula now doesn't mean that when this changes, you still won't be on the formula. So I think it's more complicated. It takes too much for me to understand.
Just to answer that question, we receive state aid, so, and I think that's again, if you get into the weeds on this stuff, every district in the state participates, is affected by the funding formula. The
Some
Right.
districts have enough local revenue that they do not receive any state aid. So, and again, depending on how this money plays out, it could be that a requirement of a $5,000 pay raise affects all that, and those districts who are not on state aid today could start receiving state aid as a result of this.
Right, so you can't predict you can't say who's going to get it and who's not right now. Right. I remember what it was I was going to say now, you reminded me. The other concern I think you do hear in some educators is that there's no funding in here for the load on that $5,000 pay raise. There's not money to pay the retirement, FICA, other things that districts will be saddled with. There's no guarantee that money will be there.
So what is your vote be? Somebody already asked, I don't know, what is your vote towards that?
For this question, for 7,700, I'm supportive. And then it goes back to that there's no other option on the table.
Right. Right, if there had been another option, I think this would have been defeated very easily. But I give a lot of credit to the education people and David Bourne that put this together to see that there was a vacuum and a failure of leadership, quite frankly, to get something done.
Pat, thank you very much.
All right, thanks.
Thank you all for coming. We do have a gift here, an Ponca City basket for Pat. I think surely we're all better informed than we were when we came in, so thank you all for coming. If you didn't get one of the printouts of the describing the state questions, they're available to chamber office. And also, this presentation was recorded on the chamber's Facebook Live, and you can go out there and, if you're technically competent, you can go out there and check that out yourself. All right, thank you all. Oh, and let me.
Also, tomorrow, you can go to poncacity.gov and view it online.
Okay. Would remind you that Friday we have our forum on education. Dr. Pennington, Bruce DeMuth, Adam Lemming, and Dr. Evans from NOC will be presenting about 15 minutes apiece, noon this Friday. So hope you'll come back and hear them. Thank you.